If you're not understanding this sort of thing, you will be led astray by wolves in sheep's clothing who will promise you the world.
Hello, welcome again to the episode of the Let People Prosper show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on a guest who's been on before. It was episode 77, and it's none other than Dr. Norman Horn. Norman, welcome to the Let People Prosper show again.
Hey, Vance, thanks for bringing me on. I love being here with you.
All right. Well, I love having you on. We're going to have a good discussion today. We got a lot to talk about. Norm, I'm not going to go through his long bio. You can go back to episode 77, which we had a great conversation about how he got to where he is and his background and everything else. So go and check that out. And I'll put that in the show notes page as well. But a short version of it is he is the founder and president of the Libertarian Christian Institute, LCI, as well as kind of mention that throughout the episode. But he does a lot of great work. Go check them out. And so with all of that, Norm, let's go ahead and jump right into it. What have you been up to lately? What's LCI doing, and how can people best find you?
Oh, yeah. Well, first thing off, thanks again. It's great being here. And I also want to just add on very briefly, because I'm not even sure we talked about it before. But everybody should know that Vance and I are fellow Texans.
Yes.
And
that's right.
And although I don't live in Texas anymore, I'm a proud UT Austin graduate and so on. I lived in Austin for years. And so, Vance, I'm always a little bit jealous of you for living in my home state. So I appreciate what you're doing very much. I recall very fondly being involved in things, kind of like what you're doing here, too, years ago while I was there. And now I get to do it here in Missouri.
Yeah, there you go.
But what are we doing at LCI? So we, over the course of my career, we've moved around a bit. That's why we are located in Missouri. These days, we have a lot of stuff going on at LCI. Probably the biggest thing that has changed over the last few years is that we've really been focusing on multimedia content. And so now we've actually been starting up new podcasts in addition to our kind of core work. And now we've actually got 7 active podcasts plus more that are kind of either you might call them archived material or just material that we're trying to maintain, as well as stuff that's on the way, including we're branching out into live streaming now with more interesting kind of both one-on-one interviews while interacting with the crowd in the process and people who are joining us for the stream. That's been very successful doing that via Twitter and YouTube, and we think that's going to really expand. That kind of comes into a big thrust of what we've noticed over the last couple of years in the kind of the shift that everybody wants toward more video content. Mm-hmm. So what we are really trying to do now is focus on that multimedia content, building out as much video material as we can, and helping people to kind of find new ways to interact with the content that we've had existent for a long time. So that means even going back to some of our older material, our evergreen content that teaches people theology, economics, and whatnot, and developing plans to get that out there in video form in some way. And so we hope that that's going to be really helpful especially for younger people trying to learn some of these complex thoughts and processes that will really help them to prepare themselves for the future. And we've even been doing that in certain additional ways as well. For instance, our Faith Ventures podcast is something that's been kind of relatively new for us. That's a podcast that's focused not just on economics or theology, but also the way in which we interact in the world through work. Because and we may have brought this up in your last episode with you as well. That we can be great talking about the problems of the state, politics as diminishing human prosperity and whatnot. But something that we don't always do really well is telling people about the bountiful nature of the marketplace. Yeah. And so we want to tell people about what great things that people of God are doing in the marketplace. And so we're telling those stories through inviting people on who are in marketing or engineers or executives or in various firms. We're going all over the place to learn from people and how they're building their careers using their faith at the center. And that's called the Faith Ventures podcast. If you're interested in being a part of that, we even invite you on. Yeah. I mean, it's a show that I host, but it's not the Norman show. Mm-hmm. It's really about people who are coming on to tell people about what God's doing in their life through their business and how they are serving other people through the marketplace and for the glory of God in the end. And so that's a great thing. We love that. kind of the final initiative that I would kind of highlight here is that we've been noting a lot of movement and interest from Latin American crowds. We've even got a Facebook page called LCI Latino, which gets a lot of traffic now. And so what we're really trying to do, and we're actually like looking for help in this because we don't even know how to accomplish this in full. We want a Spanish language website, and we want it to be side by side with what we already have. And so we're leveraging AI, we're leveraging the people who are in our network, and we're hopefully going to be leveraging people who want to fund things like this in order to try and teach more people who are primarily Spanish speakers about what liberty means and why it should be important to them. As many people, I mean, goodness, I mean, I love my Hispanic brethren in Texas. I know we have had like all sorts of issues as well with borders and whatnot, but you know what? What matters is helping people. Yeah. And so, you know, that like people need to remember that like a lot of our Hispanic brothers and sisters, they're just like us. They're looking to build families. They're looking to prosper. They're looking to do, you know, to serve other people in some way capacity so that they can make their lives better too. They're just like us. Let's find ways of helping teach them as well, and hopefully bring them the gospel in the meantime. Yeah. And while we're at it, and it's like these virtuous circles are ready and waiting for us, and so let's do it. So that's a big one for us, and hopefully that's going to be on the horizon later this year. Yeah, I love it, man. There's so much stuff going on, and you're continuing to push the envelope to say, what can we do next? Who can we outreach and bring more people in? And I've enjoyed all the podcasts. I'm subscribed to all of them, I believe. I don't know. You're adding so many more that I may not be on. How do you do that? I think so. I can't even keep up with everything. Yeah. I mean, that's actually keep that going. Go ahead. Oh yeah, well that's actually I think, you know, that it's remarkable about where we're at now. Like when I started this up, you know, it was just a little blog, and now there's so much stuff coming out that I cannot keep track of it all. Like it is so exciting to see what people really are gaining from this and what people are willing to support. Yeah, and that's because that's what we're really trying to do. It's like we're putting these voices out into the world to try and teach people from varying elements of the ecumenical Christian communities about what liberty means and how they can prosper through, you know, serving other people in the marketplace, not aggressing against people through government, and just doing good. So like there's so much we can do, and as you might expect, as in any marketplace, you never are going to understand everything that goes throughout it. So I'm excited. I'm impressed that you're keeping up with as much as you are, because it's hard for me to. I'm trying. Well, it's a lot of good information, you know, and you know, I'm more libertarian. I'm classical liberal overall, so the libertarian part goes in there. I'm a Christian, and so piecing those two together. I remember when I first found out about LCI, which is years ago now, and started following you all. I was like, man, this is right up my alley. And others, I would share information, and they're like, well, I haven't heard about this before. So it's great that you have found a niche, right? You found an opening in the marketplace that needed to be filled, and now there's demand and there's supply that you're able to provide in the process. It's a market process, if you will, that brings about these new ideas. And, you know, I think it's also excellent about your mission. You know, I'm looking at your website now, which is libertarianchristians.com, which LCI is a 501c3 nonprofit, you know, nonpartisan institution that's educating the public. And the mission is equipping Christians to spread the message of individual liberty. And you know, I love that, because I think that there's so much truth to that, and how God allows us to have this free will, if you will, to be able to go out and do things, that we have our liberty, that we have these God-given rights, and we're able to piece these things together, where too often we get caught up in the politics and parties and so many other things that are going on, that we forget that we're doing this because to serve God. Not to serve government, not to serve man, but to serve God. And too often, I think, from the political left to the right, it becomes where God becomes government too often, where they become the first government. The government becomes the first line of defense, instead of maybe what it should be the last line of defense. Instead, you know, prayer, family, churches, those things should be the first line of defense. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I really like where your mission's heading in this. That's dude, I think one of the most important meta messages that we try to promote is this idea that, like, you should be able to live your life. Okay. And that you deserve, if anything, individual liberty. Like that is what we owe each other, is the liberty to live our lives free of aggression.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I think it's kind of wild, you know, when people talk about like various things about government as though that they're promoting order in a certain way. Like, okay, you might have a very small point there, but I try to remind people a lot that, you know, if you live in a society that is characterized by a large institution that claims for itself that the ability to initiate aggression and force and power against you, and that is what characterizes your society, then you do not necessarily have a benefit of order. You have a benefit of chaos.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's what true chaos is, in fact, is not being able to have predictable interactions with other people where they are based on peace. If it's instead based on force, that's true chaos. So even as, you know, the pejorative, oh, you dirty little anarchist, you don't want to see government in anything. It's like, well, okay, I'll accept that if what you understand is that really the true chaotic interaction that you think that we're promoting is actually on the other side.
Yeah.
That it's realistically, if I cannot expect that if my interactions in the society around me are going to be based peacefully, that's what true chaos is. And so that's what the government is, though. That's what the state does. So yes, we believe in rule of law. That's what's important. We believe that we need to, you know, tamper that even with the idea of that the rule of law means that the government is held to the same standard and that they do not have a right to initiate aggression, just like you don't have a right. There is no privilege of position. And so that's what's really important that we try to get across. And it's all toward this, it's all toward the goal of being able to live your life freely and fully. That's what it means to prosper in the end too. And we prosper before God by living the life that he intends for us and being able to choose. Mm-hmm. We're not set up to be automatons. We're like, he didn't, you know, God didn't give us a blueprint in the sense of like, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3, and ad infinitum. He gives it to you and says like, what are you going to do? Yeah. What are you going to do? Are you going to serve your fellow man? Are you going to prosper that way? Or are you going to cause chaos? And the ones who cause chaos usually become, you know, senators and presidents and things. Yeah. You know, it attracts the most sociopathic and pathological among us. So
yeah. Who would have thought?
Unfortunately so.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and
endow power.
It's interesting too, because one of the things that I've been toying around with recently and hoping to write a book on this pretty soon is basically to the effect of failure is the path to let people prosper. Too often failure gets a bad rap. And often politicians, government, they want to keep you from failing. They want to stop this, that, and another. A lot of it has to do with what their perception is of what failure is throughout the marketplace. They don't want prices to be too high. They don't want you to not go to college. So everything should be free. And but even in our own personal lives, Norm, I've failed a lot. I think we might have talked about this some, where I was in a rock star band for a while as a drummer in a band and got in a bad car accident and kind of found my calling to let people prosper. And by God's grace, I'm doing what I do now and loving it. But when I look back, you know, maybe those were failures, and there was a lot of tough times. Don't get me wrong, but now I feel blessed to have went through all that. And if someone else had been orchestrating my life from government or politicians or something else, the outcomes would not be the same. I would not have learned these lessons and be able to do the things that I'm doing now had I just been, you know, basically been spoon-fed along the way and not had those failures to then see the success. And so I wonder kind of what your thought is on that.
Oh, man. I think there's something to be said for, you know, what we're trying to do as individuals is find like, what is the intersection of the things that we are kind of able to do, our talents, if you will, what the market wants and what we love to do, you know, so there's some intersection path. And if you can kind of figure out what that looks like and hit that little, you know, trifecta of intersection points there, that can make for, you know, wonderful things. If you try to only do what you can do and what you love to do, but you don't do what the market wants. Yeah. Well, okay, sure. You may enjoy it, but are you really like accomplishing something that other people want to see and will support, you know, via you know, market interaction for? Well, if you want to live that way, you can, but it may not be the best. But if you can kind of figure out where, you can find all of those intersection points, man, you found the right thing. To do that takes work. It takes you have to take opportunities, and you have to give yourself a chance to fail. If you don't, then you might end up, in two of those intersection points, but not the third. And that's where you don't want to be.
No.
I similarly, I've gone, through my own journey of entrepreneurship and of education, of trying different types of businesses and whatnot. And, it's not been a straightforward path.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to be in store for my next
Yeah.
year. I mean, if you would have asked me at the beginning of my college years, what was the pathway forward? There is no possible way that it would look like this.
Right.
It just doesn't. So being open to new possibilities and being open to the possibility that you're especially going to fail and fail hard and a lot. But always pick yourself back up. Let's learn from it as best you can. We don't need to get into the cult of failure. It's a phrase that like Peter Thiel uses sometimes. Hat tip Peter Thiel. He's awesome.
Yeah.
But there's such a value in giving yourself, room to grow through failure. That you just can't ignore it.
Yeah.
You have to be open to it.
Yeah. And nothing is free, right? There's always a price to be paid. Jesus paid the ultimate price for our sins and everything. And so, with that, there's a lot of different directions I want to go, and we can talk. We'll have more time to talk throughout this discussion. But this is episode 100 of the Let Fuel Prosper show, and it's really remarkable to have you on talking about all this stuff right now. We have
an honor.
A lot in the current events of what's going on here recently. We had the Libertarian Party, which we're not affiliated with any parties or anything. It's 501c3 status for you and everything. But that's the Libertarian Christian Institute. So I thought I'd ask you something about this.
Sure,
what you thought about what's going on there and the selection and maybe going into the general election coming up.
Yeah, it was a weird convention from my distanced observation. I was not present for it. Thankfully, I didn't really want to go this year. I had too much going on. But it was certainly interesting. I think that there was the Mises Caucus, which kind of has the predominant kind of leadership positions in the party at this point in time. I think did some really interesting things in trying to advance the libertarian message. And I do at least marginally adhere to the way that Murray Rothbard talked about the LP from years ago. And again, this is more of a personal level. This is not, I'm not endorsing as LCI at this point. But Rothbard once said that like if we're gonna have a political party then that it tries to advance libertarian, like with the name Libertarian Party or something, then at least it needs to be advancing our values and not be as concerned about just gaining power, qua power. Like it just shouldn't be. And that is ensconced, in fact, in its ethos, in its statement of principles and whatnot, which is great. So I appreciate that. That being said, I think that the convention was a mixed bag. I think that it was really interesting the way in which the party invited a variety of different people from kind of outside the party to come and speak. Giving opportunity not just to libertarians in the party, but also folks like Donald Trump, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And even they gave the invitation. Even to President Biden, was not accepted. And I think that was a really interesting shot to take. It arguably advances the libertarian ideal for this reason. Suddenly, the media were paying attention to these people who were coming in, and that puts a spotlight on the fact that the Libertarian Party is doing something, which puts a spotlight on the principles. And so that, I think, was a really interesting shot to take. And we cannot know at this point in time whether it was successful per se. It's too early to tell. But I think that was it worth the shot? Yeah, I think it probably was. I mean, if you have the opportunity to do something unusual and gain access to kind of push your message forward in a different way, I don't think you're really at fault for at least trying.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of goes back to that sort of failure thought. Like we may not know exactly if this was a success or a failure for a while, but we have to at least give ourselves a chance. So I'm kind of on board with that.
Yeah.
You know, from a personal standpoint, I'm not real thrilled I'm not really thrilled with almost any presidential candidate ever.
Yeah.
But you know, there's issues I have with the way this one went, and I'll just say, I'm not. Am I willing to give it a chance? Okay, perhaps, but at least on the certain principles that I am aware that the candidate who won, Chase Oliver, holds, not very thrilled about. And from just from a personal and theological standpoint, I'm not thrilled.
Yeah,
but you know what? Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens.
It's quite fascinating. I keep up with it as much as I could, and watch what's happening. And Chase Oliver being the nominee for the Libertarian Party, it went to what, six runoff,
7 rounds.
7 rounds. So I knew it went to a lot, and so that just shows also kind of the competition within the party of the best ideas, hopefully going forward, and everything else that you often don't see a lot in the major parties.
Well, and you might note, in fact, that what do we mean by 7 rounds? They actually do kind of a ranked choice voting, and to where the multiple rounds happens as the person other than none of the above. You always have the option in any LP election thing for voting none of the above, which is it's a classic. You have to appreciate that. But at any rate, the least voted for individual is eliminated at each round of voting, and then a new round occurs. So that's an interesting way of tabulating and choosing a nominee, because it allows you to have a preferred choice. But if it doesn't work out, then you can still get a second preference. And I know some people don't like the idea of ranked choice voting at times. I'm pretty well in support of that idea. So at any rate, that's kind of neat.
No, it's good
the way they do that. So that's why there's 7 rounds.
Yeah. No, that's great. For the background of what's going on there and everything. And, it's going to be interesting now, because now we have a situation where the general election will be in November, for president. And we have 2 of them, the major parties, which is the same as 2020, kind of reliving all this again. I guess they're going to have a debate here pretty soon.
That's going to be fun.
I know.
I kind of can't wait. It's like, it's what there's a Schadenfreude to it that I just have to like. And it's like, it's going to train wreck.
Yeah, it's going to be something else. It would be great if Chase Oliver, even with his issues and everything else on the policy side, could also be there. I don't know if that will be the case. It hasn't usually in the past, but it would be interesting to have someone else on the stage, or if RFK Jr., Robert Kennedy Jr. could be on.
Yeah, I mean, he's an interesting guy, that's for sure.
Yeah, but the country is facing so many issues right now, and whether across, whether it be inflation, which is ticking back up, and people are feeling this. If you ask people, how do you feel about the economy? It's still poor, even when the unemployment rate's like 3.9%, and all these other numbers make it seem like things are really good. The stock market's up, but people are starting feeling it, and a lot of that's been inflation. I think that they're running through all their savings. The credit card debt is reaching $1 trillion. I think we're over right around $35 trillion in national debt. Interest payments on the debt is $1 trillion, which is more than we're paying on national defense of about $850 billion. There are major issues that are going on that honestly, Norm, Trump and Biden have contributed to these issues.
Yeah. That's what's baffling, is like, each side wants to blame the other for the problem, but in some sense, they're both right. But they're not willing to take responsibility for their own actions and their own contributions to it. And I find it baffling at times. But it just goes to show, like, again, when you put people in power and allow them to make these sorts of decisions absent market response, and just another reason why you need to be able to fail so that the market can tell you to get out. And so resources can be reallocated toward more profitable endeavors. Like, if that were the case, this, government would have been thrown out, a good 50 years ago. But
yeah, and and to bring in a little bit of economics into it, it's a great case for public choice economics and James Buchanan and talking about rent sinking and how politicians are irrational and just like we are. It's just that they have a different set of cost and benefits because they need to get reelected.
Yeah. Well, and when they're not responding to price mechanisms in the same way, like then they cannot rationally allocate resources. They just can't. Like that's the number one lesson of Friedrich Hayek, and his in price theory and so on, which is what he won the Nobel Prize for.
The knowledge problem,
1973. Yeah. So the knowledge problem, right, is that they don't have knowledge is distributed in a society, and thus you cannot centralize authority to make decisions and expect that you're going to have efficiently made decisions to begin with. So if that's the case, then the government is the worst perpetrator of this because they're not even responding to prices in the same way. They can try a little bit, but because they're not the same type of market participant that has to allocate their own resources to these problems, they end up misallocating all the time. And so it's insane. It ends up becoming kind of a inculcated mass insanity. Operating from the bureaucratic line.
And it's interesting too because the people who listen to my show are probably a mixture of conservatives, probably mostly Republicans, but a lot of libertarians too. And there's legislators and congressmen and women who I know listen, along with a lot of think tankers and everything else, and hopefully some Democrats and some progressives that are listening along the way. I hope so. And I think that these discussions are really important though about who we're voting for, what's going on in the future, and what's going to be the best case, for the future. I mean, I'm going to be very hesitant to want to vote for Trump. I just to be out there. I mean, I've said this I think before, but I didn't vote for him in 2016. I worked in the White House in 2019 for a year. I did vote for him in 2020 for right or wrong, and then all of the stuff that happened after that, I was like, man, well, this is why I didn't want to vote for him. And I don't believe I'll be voting for him this time. I'm a little skeptical about the Chase Oliver from some of the policy initiatives. But I want to give him a better look as we get closer to the November election. But it's just a tough situation that we're in. That these are really the folks that are going to be running for president, and two octogenarians, and then and Chase Oliver in this mix Norm.
To imagine that you could double Chase Oliver's age and still not reach the age of either of the other major candidates. It just baffles me. Seems bizarre.
All right. So we can go on that all day.
We really could.
Let's move on. Let's move on. So there's this great book, which I think we talked some last time, but it's Faith Seeking Freedom.
Yeah. Okay. I recognize that title.
Yes. It's Libertarian Christians Answers to Tough Questions. And so Dr. Norman Horn is one of the authors, Doug Stewart, who's awesome, Kerry Baldwin's awesome, Dick Clark, just great folks. And it's actually got a foreword by Larry Reed, iPencil, those people know him, but it's got some.
Well, no.
Wrong one.
We must correct.
Okay,
that.
Please.
No, you've got, so Larry Reed is the former president of FEE. Okay. That is true. Larry Reed he's a gentleman of gentlemen's and is still living and whatnot. However, Leonard Reed, who was is no longer with us. God bless him. He wrote iPencil years ago, and it just sort of happens that they have really close names. Larry Reed is REED, Leonard Reed READ. But we love them both. I'm huge fans.
Yes. Well, yeah, that's totally my fault too. I need more coffee, I guess. But thank you for correcting me. Just real quick, that's sometimes too often I think we're worried about correcting people. Like I try to do that also on the podcast, but you know how it's difficult. Yeah. But I appreciate that a lot. It's kind of like when you have something stuck in your teeth. Like, tell me when I have something stuck in my tooth. True, anyways, this is awesome.
No, it's a super easy thing to sort of miss. And I mean, at some point, maybe we'll do a podcast on the history of various think tanks and libertarian thought, because I actually know way too much about this stuff. It's kind of embarrassing.
I like that a lot. All right, so let's go I don't want to go through every question because I want people to go out and get the book.
Of course. Well, there's over 100.
Yeah, there are hundreds of them here. But maybe we'll hit on some of the bigger ones, and we'll just kind of take a high level view for each one.
Yeah.
We've got about 10 to 15 minutes left, so we have plenty of time. We could talk about these things. But
well, let me ask you this, or tell you,
please,
let's overview something first. So this book, what we wrote this a few years ago to kind of consolidate a lot of our thoughts about how we should engage with fellow Christians and to a certain extent fellow non-Christians or other non-Christians and how to talk about libertarianism from a Christian point of view. And so, that involves both like engaging in theology, especially with our fellow Christians, and then economics and political theory and ethics with our non-Christian friends. And so what this book kind of tries to do is give people a framework for what kinds of questions are asked and how you might consider answering them. It's inspired very much by another fellow Texan, Mary Ruwart, who endorsed the book as well, who wrote a little book called Short Answers to Tough Questions. And it's all about, it's all about just trying to get pithy and quick answers to the big questions that people asked. We took a slightly different tact and made them a little more extended answers, but we anticipate, this becoming a kind of ongoing project. We're going to be expanding it in the future. We are not announcing the when at this point in time, but it's on the horizon.
Great.
So yeah, that's what it's kind of all about. And it's also like you can get it for really cheap. I mean, you come and you join LCI as an insider, we'll give you a copy. You can get it on Amazon. You can get an audiobook. You can get an ebook copy. If you're really desperate and you just need the help, email me and I'll probably help you out.
Awesome.
But we'll figure it out. But that's kind of what it's all about.
That's perfect. And so this one was published in 2020. So I'll be interested to see the updates whenever that happens. That'll be great.
They're coming.
Yeah, it's coming. It's coming. All right, good. So the first one is why should I care about politics? Because I think that's a good question, especially for those of us that are more libertarian. You've got the Brian Kaplan sort of argument of the myth of the rational voter, and why you should vote because there's only one person. But what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two ways to kind of approach this. Number one is that if you're talking to your fellow Christians, and some of them really are kind of the opinion, and and I understand it, to where I just want to be focused on the gospel. I just want to be focused on missions or something to that effect. I don't really want to get caught up in politics. I respect that. I don't really want you to get caught up that much in electoral politics either. If that's where your passion is and you're really into that, that's great. But let's think about this though. If you're trying to use that as sort of an excuse not to engage at all in the idea that, physical force is out there in the world and there's justice to be that we need to be concerned about too. If you're just trying to avoid those questions, well, then I think we need to have a better discussion from biblically speaking about why one should care about those sorts of issues. Yeah. And so part of the way the reasoning of that fellow Christian might be, well, the Bible doesn't concern itself with this sort of thing, so I shouldn't be. But that's not really correct. The Bible does concern itself with issues of justice, and it does have things to say with regards to whether or not governments are legitimate, whether or not we should be engaging in aggression. Those are ethical questions that are real. And we hearkening back to something we mentioned a few minutes ago. One of the biggest aspects of this is this idea that nobody has a special privilege of position of morality. If it is wrong for me to do as an individual, it does not suffice for me to be able to then delegate that to some other entity for which it would be moral to do. So that's really critical to understand. You do not get a special moral privilege if you are a police officer, or you wear a military uniform, or you have the honorable thus and such judge in front of your name, or that you're a president. You're still held to the same moral standard. Character does matter. Now, that's not a policy statement there, but it is. But morality does play into policy at times, and we need to be aware of that. So that's kind of the extended way of addressing it, and we get into that in greater detail, and then explore from a scriptural perspective where that comes in.
No, that's great. It's great. Yeah, because it's kind of like this one point in that chapter is about Jesus said his kingdom was not of this world. Isn't political engagement being concerned with this world? But I think But Jesus also wanted us to help each other, I think, voluntarily.
Yeah.
And in order for us to be able to do that, we have to resist the oppression and the force that's coming from government to take money away from us at the same time, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even though Jesus says his kingdom is not of this world, that you're still in this world, and so there are still things in this world we have to deal with. And part of that is art, or part of that sort of subset of things is issues of justice.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if we want to have a thoroughgoing view of this world that is thoroughgoing in our Christian view of it, then we need to address those sorts of things from that Christian worldview.
Yeah.
And so and we would contend at the LCI, at least, that libertarianism as a field, if you will, is the most consistent expression of Christian political thought. That, we can't, solve every single problem from the Bible. Like, I'll be the first to tell you, and that, the Bible doesn't teach you to bake a cake, as my father-in-law likes to say. I love that phrase. I think that's perfect. It's not going to teach you AP calculus.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. And so, you're not going to solve even all ethical problems and situations just by referring to the book of John or something. Like, that doesn't work. But what it does do, though, is it gives us the grounding for how we make these decisions and how we deal with issues of justice. And so we have all the narratives necessary in order to understand this world in the way that God would have it. The Bible is perfect in doing that. And so that's why we should look toward Scripture and toward historical theology and with our other brothers and sisters in Christ in order to better understand what's going on in the world around us. How do we respond to it? How do we build a better world?
Yep. Well put, as usual, Norm.
Thanks.
It's good. It's good. So the next major chapter here is the libertarian basics. And we're talking about lowercase libertarian. This isn't the libertarian uppercase party when we're talking about these things. There's a lot of good sections within this chapter. What makes somebody a libertarian? How is the non-aggression principle consistent with a Christian worldview, and so forth? And from just real quick, my perspective is, as a classical liberal, is somebody who wants very limited government. I believe, like you said earlier, about the rule of law, private property rights. I think are really important for the government to be able to ensure some form of a justice system, and then very few public goods for those who are really in need. But otherwise, to me, everything else should be left to the private sector, families, communities, businesses being able to exchange and allow the marketplace to set the prices to allocate resources and price in, the different quote unquote externalities instead of the government coming in and doing those things. But what's your perspective on this?
Much of the same.
I'm heading in the right direction, then, Norm.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, foundationally, what we would suggest is that, okay, so if the Bible is the way we're supposed to, in historical theology, the way we understand all these things together, or the way, or kind of our basis for understanding how we are to interact with each other, then what we learn is that, well, the first and foremost, we shouldn't be initiating violence against people. Like the only licit use of violence is in response to being aggressed against. So that's it. So from that basis, we would suggest then that corresponds or is concordant with the libertarian ethos, which is essentially what we observe from natural law. Again, we don't have to appeal strictly speaking to the Bible in order to understand libertarian thought, but we see that it intersects very well with the way in which we understand biblical thought as well. And so that's really great. That enables us to say, like, okay, we're on to something here. We have seen, we understand that our worldview, and it requires this, and this of us. The Bible's plan for salvation, the Bible's understanding of human nature and the way in which we interact, and the type of moral code that we live by and promote, is the similar sort of thing that we see in libertarian thought in the end.
Yep.
It is not libertarian thought is not. Excuse me, I'm having some issues here. I might have to take a drink.
Hey, go for it.
Libertarian thought is not expansive or all encompassing. That's the other thing to consider, is that I kind of disagree when people even talk about the idea of a libertarian worldview. I don't think that exists. It is a limited set of ideas dealing with issues of justice and how we are to deal with use of force in society.
Yeah, that makes sense. And while you're getting a drink real quick too, it's also it's different from conservatism, because on the spectrum of, like, when I said classical liberal, there is this part of that spectrum that I think is more conservative. If you think about along that spectrum there, but conservatism is more about, well, conserving things for one, probably a little bit more than libertarians would want, but also it's become more about, or not become, but it's more about there's an order. There's an ordered liberty, and to me, it's like, okay, who's doing the ordering, and how will you put that order in place? Whether it be Russell Kirk or Edmund Burke, I mean, you can kind of go back to these different views on conservatism, but there are pretty big differences that are there between this view, and I think it's even become more pronounced here recently, where more of these kind of NatCons, national conservatives, are coming out and almost basically saying, look, government should be doing this. Whereas the more libertarians like us, we're saying, well, no, but government's the problem to begin with, and getting into that direction.
I'd probably suggest that one of the biggest differences between the conservative ethos or mindset in this respect versus the libertarian one is that the conservatives tend to think that order comes from some top-down, statement from the beginning. Whereas I think the libertarian has to look at it where, okay, yeah, we have these principles, and if that's what you're saying is the top down, okay, fine, but we would suggest, and that this comes from not maybe the best thinker ever, but Proudhon said, liberty is the mother, not the daughter of order. So you need to have individual liberty in order to properly have order. And that, again, kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier with regards to the difference between chaos and order. If your top-down solution is predicated on giving it a monopoly of force that enables it to get done what it wants to get done, come hell or high water, the order is going to come from here. I would suggest that involves a level of chaotic thinking, and that it is actually not inducing of order in the end. It's actually like it's an artificial construct of order. Instead, that's actually chaos, because now I have the predictability of my interactions is not going to be predicated on peaceful interaction, but on what came from the top down, which started with the monopolization of force. Yeah. So that's where I come in and feel like that's my big difference with a lot of conservative thinkers. I know that we're going to have a lot of convergence. And that's fine. Yeah. I want to work with you, and we will come to that better conclusion. If you're kind of willing to say, like, look, I'll jettison everything about the excesses of government to only have a court system and a little bit of protection and whatnot in order to maintain that order, is like, okay, fine, like I'll take that bet, and then once we get there, we can go to the rest of the way. I'll take that, but. Our philosophical difference, while there is that intersection point, that is a significant difference. Yeah. And
I think it's important, for us to be able to point that out, to where there are a lot of similarities, but there are some big differences along the way. And one of the concerns I have too, with your great points there, was that once you have this top-down approach, it can also be transformed from someone who is, let's say, more progressive. So for example, you get someone in who's doing the things you really want. Let's put it, Trump in this discussion, deregulation, some tax cuts and stuff like that, spent way too much. He didn't get into any wars, which was a good thing.
Thank goodness.
And that sort of thing. But then when you have all that power being in the executive branch, as soon as Biden came in, he threw out all those dereg. He re-regulated everything and increased spending even more on steroids. Got us into some other wars, and it can be turned around against you very quickly because you put too much power at the top, right?
Yeah, and that's that goes back to that great one of the perhaps my favorite conservative of the last 50 years, like Barry Goldwater said, the government that can give you everything you want is also the government that can take it all away. Yeah. And so that's I think, and one of the principal problems with these NatCons, even the Christian Nationalists, which I think are arguably even worse at times, because they want to endow some sort of executive with insane amounts of power in order to get what they want. And they justify this on grounds of, well, you know, the progressives got what they wanted. Why shouldn't we? I mean, that's what their arguments often amount to. It's not a principled argument anymore. And so I find that very disturbing. That is, you know, definitively against, you know, the kinds of intersectional type of, like, intersections of conservatives and libertarians and whatnot, that sort of, you know, call it fusionist mentality, if you will. Like, I can work with you if we have these sorts of similar goals, and that's great. Similarly, I'm happy to work with progressives, for that matter, who have those sorts of similar goals, and I have before. We go harken back to the ancient history of the fights against the TSA. You know. Go with my men, my fam there.
There you
go. That good times, but we won't get into that. Nonetheless, you know, we can work together when we have those similar goals. But I don't think that like the NatCon and Christian Nationalist position, they don't have those types of goals in mind.
No,
and they don't even have, in many respects, they try to kind of pay lip service to individual liberty at moments, but that's not what they're interested in. Oftentimes, it's I love like Stephanie Slade at Reason did, you know, some coverage of the NatCon convention last year, and described it as like, this is the conservative will to power conference, basically. And it was oh my gosh, like her perceptivity there was just like right on the money, and I've been using that ever since.
It's a great way to put it.
Sort of will to power conservatism is just ain't where it needs to be.
It's essentially old progressivism. You know, you think about Teddy Roosevelt and others.
It's a freaking woke right, man. They're the woke right.
I agree. Well, let's keep going a little bit. A lot more of these. So there's a whole chapter on what is government. I think we've touched on most of that already, though. And I want to leave a lot for the reader to get out of this too. You know, and does a free society have limits? Is the next major chapter. I think we've hit on a lot of that. But if you have something you want to mention, please do.
I think that the main thing there really is that, you know, one of the classic objections to us as libertarian Christians, or Christian libertarians, depending on how you want to call it, is that, well, aren't you just promoting libertinism? I have to get into my, you know, my South Texas drawl there. But that is sort of a, you know, aren't you guys just wanting to, you know, to smoke weed and do your bad stuff without an end? Okay, look, that's not the way this is. Like we try to answer those objections from the outset. Again, those are distractions from the real issues at hand. We're concerned with principles. If that leads to people being able to do things that, you know, we don't like, look, we have different ways of dealing with that than trying to sick a policeman. Like we can do better than this. So, you know, that's really the message there. Is that we try to understand, like, what are these real limits of the free society? You know, what does that look like, and why are we as libertarians? I think we can be more confident in our judgment of how to build that society.
When it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Norm, about morality and the Christian morality and the ethics that are involved. I mean, there are some things that we're not necessarily going to support just because of the ethical stuff, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't need to be in the marketplace or for the government to come in and prohibit it. Because we also understand trade-offs matter, right? And when you start banning things, you have underground market, a black market that develops that's worse than the government trying to do things. Just look at the war on drugs and all the people that are locked up right now, and the dads that can't be dads because they're locked up for small amounts of weed or something else. I mean, that is a travesty. I don't see, but and so there are limits within society of our mores, the norms that go on, and based on the Christian faith. So if we're able to hopefully get out there and talk to more people about Christianity and everything else, and show through us how we're serving God, hopefully we're also bettering the culture with which we're in.
And so many problems that, you know, conservatives often identify as being, you know, moral issues in today's world are often precipitated by policies that go back, you know, years, decades even, that lead to deleterious effects. You know, you want to, like you mentioned, one of the great ones that I think is completely underappreciated. It's like, we want to talk about, you know, the crisis of single parent homes, and, you know, dads getting unjustly, put into prison because of for minor offenses. And that's wrong. And we should call a spade, call the policy for what it is. The war on drugs is arguably the dumbest policy that has been implemented in like the last 100 years. I mean, and I will stand on and defend that. And that is a line in the sand for us at LCI. And it has nothing to do with me wanting to go smoke pot or something. I've never smoked pot in my life. I have no care to do so. That is not what I care about at all.
I won't comment on mine then.
It's I don't need to have a strong moral stance on like I'm. Yeah,
I was a rock drummer. Remember that,
dude. I'm of the opinion that we are 100 years behind schedule because of the war on drugs and developing therapeutic treatments. As a scientist, I find this kind of prohibition appalling, and on every single intellectual level, the war on drugs is stupid. So anyway, I'll stop
just to put in a finer point about the distinction maybe between us and some others that are out there is that there's a huge discussion about right now why a single parent or a father can't provide for his household. And there you could talk about inflation adjusted incomes and median incomes, but just think about those families who don't have a dad in their life. And the breakdown of the family. And then they'll say, well, we need to have government come and give out child tax credits, or we need the government to come and do all this stuff. Well, you've led to this.
You have to do that. Yeah. What's also crazy, like, we as thinking economist type people understand the concept of compound interest and the compound negative interest that accrues when you break up families due to these sorts of things. And there's lots of ways that families can decompose. I'm not going to dispute that. But look at just the deleterious effects of government policy on families over the last 100 years in this respect. Like, it's baffling to me that we don't see this. And so, I mean, my message to Christians a lot of times is it's Henry Hazlitt's first lesson. Let's go with that. Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt should be required reading for every high school student out there. Homeschoolers, are you listening? Go read Henry Hazlitt, Economics in One Lesson. That one lesson is this: you can't just look at the immediate impacts of policies. You have to look at the second order effects and the tertiary effects. And when you do that, you begin to realize that policies and like this goes back to like, should we be concerned about politics? Well, it's because of these types of things. Like if you're not understanding this sort of thing, you will be led astray by wolves in sheep's clothing who will promise you the world and say that you need things like, we need a strong, Christian prince, you stupid Christian nationalist, or things like that, in order to get what you want, your moral society, your prosperity or whatnot. It does not depend upon that. It depends on individuals who go out there and create wealth for everybody, for everybody around us through voluntary interactions, market operations, and innovation. It's not that hard. The government is able to screw it up so completely. It's baffling that we're in this situation now. Like, we have all the tools available in order to create prosperity. We just got to get out of our own way sometimes. That's
right. Amen. And we could go into the war on poverty. It's kind of like as soon as they say a war on something, it's going to go in the opposite direction.
Oh, yeah. Well, you could probably surmise that if they are calling for a war on something, it's probably not a problem. And that sounds kind of distant. Let me clarify what I mean by that for a second. Is that when they decide that it's a problem that they need to solve like that, they're probably being disingenuous about it. That's really probably what how I should word that. It's not that it's not a problem, but they are being disingenuous about it.
And we've seen huge expansions of government from each one of those things that takes up more of our liberty and more of our freedom and peace and prosperity. Imagine that.
Imagine that.
And let's go through a couple more of these real quick. And we have, is capitalism problematic? I think we've talked about that quite.
Short answer, no.
No. It's the best way actually to allow for our morals to determine the future. but because
Yeah.
we're able to go into the
Yeah.
marketplace and mutually benefit from transactions. And if you don't want to do it, then don't exchange.
Yeah.
This gets into this war on big tech. Speaking of wars right now, it's like, if you don't
Yeah.
want to deal with it, then get out of it. Stop
don't.
going towards that direction.
Yeah, you asked for this. You...
Yeah. Then we have, what about Christian morals and ethics? We've talked about that.
Yep.
What about public
yeah.
goods and services? What about nationalism, nation state, and patriotism? I mean, this is all just, great stuff that's in there. Go ahead.
That's as close as we got in that chapter to kind of talking about things like we didn't actually allude to Christian nationalism in the book, and that's one of the corrections I think that we'll be addressing in a later edition, is addressing that in particular, because I think that a lot of people are being led astray by wolves in sheep's clothing, and that is perhaps a bad pun for those in the know about certain figures. They who shall not be named, but their names are wolf. But we'll deal with that in the future.
Okay, good. What about social justice? I think
that's classic problem.
Yep, that's huge too, that we talked about. But like some more of the specifics, you'll also get into a lot of the key issues that are still relevant today, and will be for a while. The next big one is, what about immigration?
Yeah.
And you hear, well, the libertarians just open borders, just let everybody go in and across and everything else. And for one thing, I think they're saying that in a pejorative. Well, I know they're saying a pejorative way.
It's pejoratively, yeah.
But I think we also need to get Norm back to the idea that we need to treat people like people, no matter where they're at in the world. Yeah. They're God's creatures. God created us, in His image. Is the way, is what the Bible tells us. And so whether they're here or in Mexico or in China, I mean, maybe they're not necessarily Christians, which should be an opportunity for us if they're coming here.
Exactly. Yeah. That's sort of a perplexing thing. You kind of wonder, is like, wait a second. Now, again, I'm not going to dispute that there aren't immigration issues that need to be dealt with.
Same.
And anybody who's coming over, who's committing crimes and acts of aggression against others, like, I'm not defending that by any means. But do we believe in the free movement of free peoples? We should. Yeah. I mean, even the Supreme Court affirmed that years ago, that the freedom to move is a fundamental right. And do we believe in the United States of America these days, and fundamental rights as actually fundamental? Because sometimes it seems like that folks only believe that rights exist for Americans. Yeah. And that really bugs me. Again, I'm not trying to say that there aren't immigration issues and that there aren't problems. But when you see parents who are trying to, because of the way of life that is in their home country, risk everything just to get their kid over here, at least take a step back and be like, okay, something's wrong here. Let's try and figure out where we can go better. A big part of that, by the way, is the drug war. Yes. Get rid of the drug war, and a lot of this stuff starts going away.
Yep. And the
cut
other one
the
they usually
cartels off at the knees.
Yeah, the other one they usually get concerned about is like, the safety nets, the welfare. Well, it's like, let's reduce welfare for everyone then. Yeah.
Well, you would think, but that's not often what they want, and that's just it's baffling. Yeah. But I also note, like, look, there was a Texas comptroller report years ago that actually tabulated and figured out that even illegal immigrants were less costly on the welfare system than native borns. Congratulations. They kind of figured out, and you can kind of understand why, because of course, well, guess what? If you actually reveal yourself as an illegal immigrant, oftentimes that puts you at a risk factor for getting, deported. Yep. And granted, again, I'm not trying to say that there's not problems. I'm not going to go there. But
Norm, I don't know where you're on this. Are you doing okay on time? You still got a little time?
Yeah, I got time. Right, cool. I'm good to go.
This is the 100th episode, so
let's go.
Let's do it. Something going back to what we talked about earlier, the rule of law. I do believe in borders of countries and upholding the rule of law. So there should be some sort of quote unquote restrictions or limitations of who can come and go out. But I just think what we have is a bad immigration system.
It's terrible.
We have one that's based on quotas and that is a knowledge problem of how many people we should have going in and out of the country whenever you have shortages in so many areas of our economy that the businesses would allow for them to come over. I kind of like that Richard Vedder, he has a good piece on this paper talking about a market immigration system to where you have prices set on the visa for the businesses to pay or the individuals to pay to come over here. And then you could also know who's coming in and out instead of having a situation where people are going to coyotes and the cartels to bring people over. I mean, we're forcing this into a bad situation, going into the unintended consequences like we talked about earlier.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and there's a great article from a couple of years ago, I think, and it was actually in Reason, called "There Is No Line," which I think is it's a good line because, sometimes people like to suggest that, oh, well, I'm not against these immigrants. I just want them to go in the line just like everybody else. But guess what? There really isn't a line. Yeah. The problem is, like you said, we have a system of laws that are not that good, based on things like quotas and whatnot, that make for more difficult immigration patterns to emerge. And that's like, it's baffling to me that that we're not fixing this, in part because I think the politicians are frankly invested in there being a problem, because so long as there is a problem for them to solve and that you don't like, and that they can get you up in arms about and pit you against each other, that's how they stay in power. And so I mean, I kind of feel like that for the longest time was this way, even on the abortion issue as well, that there were lots of incentives for folks to not solve the problem because it enabled people to kind of be at odds at each other, and thus, enable the people at the top to stay in their power positions. So do I have super solid proof on that? I don't. I think it's a suspicion. I don't want to necessarily deceive in that respect. I never intend to deceive. Yeah. But
I think there's a lot of truth to that, in the sense of, public choice economics. And, there's a lot of economists that have talked about this. Because of the interest groups that are out there, the rent seeking and wanting to win re-election. I mean, the other big issue here is on free trade. I mean, people want to blame everything on trade with China and India, or mainly we hear about China, right? But the issue again goes back to people. They're people, first of all. We should treat people like people. It's not that China is trading with America. That can't happen. It's the Chinese trading with Americans. And yes, there are some issues dealing with China, given that they don't have free trade policies and everything else. But I always came at it from like the Milton Friedman view. It's we should unilaterally say we're open to free trade. So that way we can show the path forward and not hurt our citizens in the process. If we want to pay for cheaper steel because China is making the steel and dumping it in the market, keeping the price low, why would we not want that for our consumers?
Why do you not want that? Yeah. Well, and it's just crazy too, because like this thought process of, oh, well, we should just we need to protect our home industries. Like, well, okay, look, the more protective that you get in this respect, the more that like you elicit a defensive response. So, it goes back to what Frederick Bastiat, the French classical liberal, that said, if goods and services don't cross country borders, armies eventually will. This is how you want to protect. Like, these folks are like, oh, we need to protect our culture. You want to protect your culture? You want to expand your culture and export your values, export goods and services. This is how you do it. Like, we have all the tools, guys. You don't need to do this. And, another thing, I think, going back to kind of this immigration bit too, I want to say one other thing, which I think I think that there is an opportunity to see one of the biggest opportunities for prosperity that I could imagine is allowing for effective, safe, and numerous, if you will, free movement of free peoples in this respect will just launch us into the stratosphere in terms of productivity and prosperity. Here's why. It is predicated on individual liberty. Okay. And here's why. Where they might say, well, where are these people going to stay? Good question. We have a marketplace for that. If we would get out of the way of building new places to live, removing zoning restrictions and terrible laws with respect to how we build houses, how we build single family dwellings, multifamily dwellings, apartments. If we do get out of the way of that and make that cheaper effectively, then we would be able to solve this problem. It's not that hard. We have a lot of land mass in this in the United States of America. This is not an impossible problem to solve.
And stop.
But the materials are so expensive.
And stop subsidizing the demand too. Unleash supply.
Exactly.
Stop subsidizing the demand. For us as Americans, we'd be in a much better situation. And the Federal Reserve, which we should end the Fed, right?
Yeah. And getting out of the mentality that housing only should increase in price.
Yeah.
Like that is one of the most destructive. I mean, this is a big, like we feel this right now, even in our family. It's like, it's insane how difficult it is sometimes to even just buy a house these days. It's absolute madness. And how do you remove that problem? Well, you deal with things like zoning laws. You deal with export problems. Like if you're going to put protectionism on, locally made goods, it's going to make it more expensive, which means that in order to build more stuff, it's going to get more expensive. Like you can solve all these problems by removing the restrictions, by removing protectionism, by making individual liberty the normative thing as opposed to the incidental. And suddenly we can house people. Oh wait, but we also need to feed them. Yeah, we have a lot of land mass for that too. If you'll get out of the way and let people make food and let people innovate in that area, then you know what? We're not going to have a problem. Oh, but then I don't know how we're going to deal with all the welfare stuff. Okay, come on, really? Oh, what are we getting? Is that our problem now? Do you like? Maybe we should reduce welfareism. Right. And by the way, if we're producing like crazy, we probably solve that problem automatically. Yeah. So like, let's get out of the mentality that we're limited in our ability to deal with people because of the inability of the government to manage itself. Yep. That is like, it's so stupid. Yep. When the way that this ends up getting handled.
Yeah, and adding to that, which you well put there, people talk about, we've seen the drain of the manufacturing sector and how all those jobs are going to China and everything else. Well, if you do all these things you just mentioned and removing obstacles here in America, we would unleash the manufacturing sector. We'd have the people.
It might reorganize itself. But that's okay. Yeah. Like, this is not a problem.
No, it goes back to, like, if we're pointing our finger at one person, we've got three more fingers pointing back at us to where we need to unleash our own economy, get rid of the corporate income tax, find other ways to reduce the cost of doing business here, reduce the welfare state, all this stuff. I mean, right now we're spending over $6 billion a year by the federal government, right? When I think if you just did, if you did national defense and you did a couple other things, we could get that down to $1 trillion easily. Now that means a huge breakdown of the federal government and the bureaucracy, but that's what we need. It's keeping us. It's harming us. It's not helping us in the process.
Yeah. It's just keep basic rule of law, and let's start eliminating not mark this off the list.
That's right.
Yep. Close this off.
Yes.
Or as our friend Javier Milei likes to say, afuera!
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. He's been doing some great stuff there for sure. And in Argentina, it's been amazing.
Yeah.
Hopefully that will continue.
By the way, fun fact, he's coming to Freedom Fest in July.
Nice.
And we are going to be there too. So come see us, come see Javier Milei.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Well, just kind of finishing this up, you also have a chapter on what about the environment and creation.
Yep. Yes.
And if you want to say anything on that.
Oh, it's kind of the classic objection that, well, if we didn't have the government to deal with, environmental problems, then wouldn't we just live in a more polluted world, and wouldn't it just, go off the deep end? And the answer to that is quite simply, that's insane. The governments of the world are the biggest polluters, period. Full stop. I mean, we could go on that for an hour. And I've even written a paper on it a long time ago. It was my first academic paper I published, in fact, about the government and transportation pollution. At any rate, that it's very clear that it's not governments that drive pollution cleanup efforts, and then in the end, it's actually people's desire for a better environment, and the fact that industrialization actually helps us in the end, and so on. So like it's a very simple argument in the end that people just get kind of bamboozled on. I wish that if there anything that I would kind of add on to it, and because I don't think that we address this in great detail, but things like energy production, we absolutely have to get, the government out of this stuff.
Yeah.
Nuclear power is like, I mean, this is not really a Christian argument at that point.
Yeah.
This is more of a technological one, but as a sentist, I get to make those.
Yep. Yeah.
Nuclear power is how we win.
Yep.
Like that's just, it's very clear. And it baffles the mind why we don't.
Yeah, and if we just look at history, right, the richer that we've become, the richer countries are the ones that have less pollution, not more. America's harmful pollutants, which even the EPA doesn't consider carbon emissions a harmful pollutant, but the harmful, like particulate matter, some other things, those are going down dramatically in the U.S. compared to like China and India, they're going up. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, amazing how that works, right?
Yeah.
It's
so
if you really want to get pollution, into the stratosphere, just become communist Soviet Union again. Like do what you want, become communist. Okay, you're gonna destroy your environment.
It goes back to capitalism, right, versus socialism. Yeah. We need more capitalism, not socialism.
Yep.
And things of that nature. And the last big thing chapter here is Christian misconceptions of libertarianism. I think we've covered most of that. A
lot of them, yeah. It kind of summarizes a lot of those little objections, if you will.
Yep.
And the kind of,
So anyway, I mean, it's a really short book. I mean, what is it? Maybe 120.
It's 120
pages,
roughly.
A lot of good information as we've just went through here. This has been an excellent conversation as always, Norm. Thank you for doing the 100th episode of the Let People Prosper show. I would say a little longer. This is probably the longest one I've ever had on here.
What? Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I try to keep them short because people's attention span isn't that long, but hopefully they'll find this really interesting and go through them all.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I love it. And it's fun talking with you. It's fun talking about ideas and to promote, the for the glory of God and the prosperity of mankind.
Amen.
Because that's
Amen.
One of his goals too.
That's right. For the audience, y'all can find Norm and the Libertarian Christian Institute at libertarianchristians.com. He's also on X, formerly known as Twitter, and all the other fun stuff. But what other places would you want people to look out for you? And all the podcasts. Don't forget the podcast.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we have tons of podcasts. You can find us, of course, on your standard favorites: Spotify, Apple, etc., and various other podcasting platforms. You'll find us on YouTube. Of course, we have the one of our newer shows is called the LCI Green Room. Mm-hmm. That's been really fun. We'd have like kind of live shows with special guests, and who knows, maybe we'll bring you on.
There you go,
man. We gotta get this going.
I like it.
No, it's terrific fun, and you can find us again libertarianchristians.com. You can find me at Norman Horn on X, at LCI Official as well, and then various kind of our hosts are on there too. Lots of stuff going on. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/Libertarian Christians. And oh my goodness, there's all sorts of ways to kind of interact with us, but we appreciate your support. We would encourage you that if you think that what we're doing is worthwhile and you want to be part of it, we would love to invite you into our Insiders program or talk to you about our various programs and what we're trying to do in order to expand the Word of God and expand human liberty. I would really like to kind of end with, what we do at LCI is I think we really kind of consider our message as amplifying the voice of all our supporters. It is not the Norman show. It's not the Doug show or the Kerry show or the Dick Clark show or something to that effect. It is all about, taking the initiative from, or not the initiative, taking the injunction from our supporters and the money and support and love and prayers that they put and poured toward us, toward doing this mission. So we appreciate everybody in that respect. Thank you, Vance, for being a part of it. We pray for your success as well. And it's been great. And we look forward to many, many years of even greater success in promoting human prosperity.
Amen. Well, I love it. And I should note that I am an insider for LCI for the audience. So it's great. There's a lot of good information there. So be sure to go check it out for the audience. And God bless you and your family, Norm, and keep up the great work at LCI and otherwise.
All right. Thanks, man.
Thanks. Awesome. Well, for the audience, I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Go out and give us a 5-star rating. Share with your friends and family the good news of serving God, libertarian ways, and how we can have a more prosperous and peaceful future. And remember, you can find all the show notes at vanceginn.substack.com or vanceginn.com. And I look forward to our next episode together. Be sure to listen every week. And until next time, let people prosper.
Bye.